The classroom hummed with an undercurrent of tension as the instructor's voice boomed through the amphitheater. The walls glowed faintly with holographic projections of Earth's biosphere, forests teeming with life, bustling cities, and towering mountains wrapped in a swirl of clouds. At the center of it all stood a diagram of the human body, rotating slowly like an artifact of some ancient mystery. Professor Zarthix, a towering figure with 3 sets of eyes scanning the crowd, clicked a claw against the podium. The human species, remarkably intelligent, undeniably innovative, yet biologically frail. His words hung in the air, eliciting snickers from the students scattered across the lecture hall. Jektal shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his 4 arms crossed as his antennae twitched. He had heard these sentiments before. Humans were clever, yes, but they weren't seen as durable. Not like his people, the Kixalians, whose dense exoskeletons made them impervious to most blunt force trauma. Certainly not like the Voral, whose regenerative abilities allowed them to regrow limbs within days. Compared to the Galactic Union's hardiest species, humans were whispered about as soft-bodied opportunists. The hologram zoomed in, highlighting the human skeleton. Zarthix continued, "Their bones are thin. Their muscles, though functional, pale in strength compared to a Voral hatchling. Even their skin is delicate, tearing at the slightest pressure. And yet," he paused, his voice thick with condescension, "the Union has seen fit to allow them into our prestigious academy. A decision I still find curious." Laughter rippled across the room. One student, Zyron, raised his crystalline hand, its translucent edges refracting the dim light. "Professor, isn't it true that humans require entire medical facilities for minor injuries? I've heard they can perish from something as simple as a fractured rib." Another round of laughter echoed, and Jektal felt his irritation rise. Zyron's smug tone grated on him, but he stayed silent. Humans weren't perfect, but their inclusion in the Union hadn't been without merit. They had brought ingenuity and persistence to the galactic stage, and Jektal couldn't help but feel there was more to them than met the eye. "Precisely, Zyron," Zarthix replied unfazed. "Their fragility is a paradox. Their advancements suggest intelligence, yet their bodies scream vulnerability. Why they continue to thrive remains one of the great ironies of the galaxy." The doors at the back of the hall slid open with a hiss, and a single figure entered. Conversations faltered as heads turned. A human stood in the entryway, dressed in the Academy's standard training uniform, a sleek black suit with white piping along the seams. Lieutenant James Carter strode into the room with a self-assured gait, his piercing eyes scanning the rows of alien students. His movements were fluid, his shoulders relaxed, but his presence seemed to unsettle the crowd. The room, designed for species that often exceeded 8 feet in height, dwarfed Carter's compact, 6-foot frame. He reached the professor's podium and stood with an easy smile, though Jektal could see the tension in his jaw. "Am I interrupting?" Carter asked, his voice steady but carrying an edge. Zarthix turned his 3 sets of eyes toward the human and gave a thin, humorless smile. "Ah, Lieutenant Carter, how fortuitous. We were just discussing the remarkable dichotomy of human existence." "Is that so?" Carter replied, his smile tightening. The professor gestured to the hologram of the human skeleton. "Your kind fascinates us, Lieutenant. So fragile, so mortal, and yet here you are, studying among species far stronger, far more resilient. Would you care to enlighten us on how humans manage such feats?" Carter's smile didn't waver, but his voice hardened. "We survive because we adapt, Professor. It's not always about brute strength. Sometimes it's about finding another way." Zyron leaned forward, his crystalline form catching the light. "Adaptation? Is that what you call running away from danger?" The room erupted in laughter, and Jektal clenched his fists. He expected Carter to bristle, to lash out. Instead, the human chuckled, shaking his head. "Running away?" Carter's eyes gleamed with something Jektal couldn't quite place. "Sometimes retreat is the smartest move you can make. But when it counts, we don't run. We stand." The weight of his words silenced the room. Even Zyron seemed momentarily stunned. Carter glanced around, his gaze lingering on Jektal for a moment before addressing the crowd. Tomorrow's training exercise will be a good chance to show you what I mean. Zarthix arched a brow. Confidence, Lieutenant? Or hubris? Carter smirked. Guess we'll find out. As Carter left the room, a murmur rose among the students. Zyron scoffed, muttering something about human arrogance, but Jektal remained quiet. He couldn't shake the look in Carter's eyes, calm, steady, and burning with something Jektal could only describe as defiance. Later in the academy dormitory, Jektal replayed the interaction in his mind. What drove a species so fragile to walk into a room of skeptics and challenge them head-on? What gave someone like Carter the confidence to face such odds without flinching? The more he thought about it, the more he realized he wanted to understand. Humans weren't just adapting to survive. They were thriving in an environment designed to test their limits. Perhaps there was more to their resilience than anyone in that lecture hall understood. And tomorrow, Jektal would get his chance to see it firsthand. The wind howled through the dense jungle as the team stood at the edge of a ravine, their breaths visible in the humid air. The simulated environment was designed to mimic the hostile terrains of the outer colonies. Towering trees with phosphorescent leaves, jagged rocks slick with condensation, and a pervasive mist that obscured vision beyond a few meters. It was unnervingly quiet, save for the faint hum of the automated drones circling somewhere in the distance, waiting to strike. Lieutenant James Carter crouched near a boulder, his hand tracing the map displayed on his wrist console. The device flickered slightly, struggling to penetrate the interference caused by the simulated electromagnetic storm overhead. Around him, the mixed-species team looked on, their expressions ranging from skepticism to outright disdain. He was the only human in the group, and judging by the whispers he'd caught earlier, no one was thrilled about it. "Do you even know what you're doing, human?" Zyron's sharp, crystalline voice cut through the silence. The Voral's translucent form shimmered faintly under the dim light, his tone dripping with condescension. "Perhaps we should take the lead before you get us all killed." Carter didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he continued scanning the terrain, mentally mapping escape routes and vantage points. "You're welcome to lead, Zyron," he said coolly, glancing up. "But if you do, you'll walk straight into an ambush. The drones will be expecting a head-on approach." Zyron bristled, his sharp edges refracting the light in a burst of iridescence. "And what would you suggest, human? That we tiptoe around like prey?" His words were met with murmurs of agreement from some of the others. Jektal, standing at the rear of the group, observed silently. His antennae twitched as he studied Carter, noting the calm efficiency with which the human assessed the situation. There was no bluster in his movements, no bravado, just focus. "We don't need to tiptoe," Carter replied, standing and addressing the group. "But we do need to think. These drones are programmed to prioritize targets based on perceived threat levels. That means they'll go for the largest, most heavily armored among us first." Several of the larger aliens shifted uncomfortably at this revelation. Zyron sneered, clearly unimpressed. "And what's your plan, Lieutenant? Use yourself as bait." Carter smiled faintly, his eyes glinting with something unspoken. "If that's what it takes." Before Zyron could respond, the jungle erupted into chaos. A series of high-pitched whines sliced through the air, followed by bursts of plasma fire. The drones had found them. Shards of energy sizzled past, carving deep gouges into the rocks and trees. The team scattered, diving for cover as the attackers descended in a flurry of metallic wings and glowing eyes. "Move!" Carter barked, his voice cutting through the panic. He sprinted to higher ground, his movements quick and precise despite the uneven terrain. "Stay low and keep to the shadows. Jektal, cover the flank." Zyron, suppressing fire on my mark. For a moment, there was hesitation. Then, reluctantly, the team followed his commands. Jektal took up a defensive position, his dual plasma rifles firing in controlled bursts to keep the drones at bay. Zyron unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, his irritation palpable, but his aim unerringly accurate. Carter darted between cover, drawing the drone's attention. Their targeting systems locked onto him, interpreting his smaller size as a weaker threat. He used their programming against them, leading them into crossfire zones where Jektal and Zyron picked them off one by one. But the drones were relentless. One broke through the line, diving straight at Carter with bladed appendages extended. He rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the strike, and fired his sidearm into its exposed circuitry. The drone exploded in a shower of sparks, but not before a shard of metal grazed his leg, slicing through his suit and into his flesh. Carter hissed in pain, dropping to one knee. Blood seeped through the fabric, staining it dark red. He gritted his teeth, tying a strip of his sleeve around the wound to staunch the bleeding. There was no time to dwell on the injury. Another drone was already closing in. Jektal saw the blood, his antennae twitching with alarm. "Lieutenant, you're injured. Fall back and let us handle this." "I'm fine," Carter growled, forcing himself to his feet. His voice was steady, but the strain in his expression was evident. "We stick to the plan? Keep them off me while I disable the beacon." The beacon. Jektal had almost forgotten. It was the drone's command node, hidden somewhere in the jungle and responsible for coordinating their attacks. Destroying it was the key to ending the exercise and surviving. Carter limped toward the signal his wrist console had picked up, his every step a test of willpower. The pain in his leg was sharp and unyielding, but he pushed it aside, focusing only on the mission. Behind him, the team continued to hold the line, their coordinated efforts a testament to his leadership. He reached the beacon, a sleek, cylindrical device embedded in a clearing. Its surface pulsed with energy, surrounded by a swarm of drones acting as its guardians. Carter crouched behind a fallen tree, his mind racing. Charging in would be suicide, but time was running out. His team couldn't hold out forever. Drawing a deep breath, he activated a grenade from his utility belt and set it to a timed detonation. He hurled it into the center of the swarm, then dashed forward, firing his sidearm with precision. The drones swarmed him instantly, their programming overriding all other priorities. He became the focus of their aggression, a lone figure standing against an onslaught of metallic death. The grenade detonated, the shockwave ripping through the clearing and obliterating the beacon. The drones faltered, their movements jerky and uncoordinated as their command node was destroyed. Carter stumbled back, collapsing against a tree. His vision blurred, the pain in his leg now joined by a searing burn along his arm from a stray plasma shot. The jungle fell silent. One by one, the remaining drones powered down, their systems failing without the beacon to guide them. The exercise was over. Jektal and the others emerged from their positions, their faces a mixture of relief and disbelief. Zyron approached Carter, his crystalline form shimmering with an uncharacteristic hesitation. You actually did it?" Carter managed a faint smile, his voice hoarse. "Told you. We don't run." Jektal knelt beside him, helping him to his feet. "Why didn't you retreat when you were injured? You could have died." Carter's expression hardened, though his tone remained calm. "Retreating wasn't an option. Not when the team was counting on me. Humans don't quit just because it's hard. We push through." Jektal stared at him, the words sinking deep into his thoughts. For the first time, he began to understand what set humans apart. It wasn't their strength or their speed. It was their unyielding determination. The infirmary's sterile lights reflected harshly off the polished metal walls, casting faint shadows as Lieutenant James Carter sat on the edge of a medical cot. His leg was freshly bandaged, his arm wrapped in a synthetic healing gel. A monitor blinked quietly beside him, its readout showing his vitals, steady but not without strain. The Academy's medics had offered pain suppressants, but he had declined. The ache, sharp and unrelenting, was a reminder of what had happened, of what was at stake. Jektal stood near the door, his arms crossed, antennae drooping slightly in a way that betrayed unease. He had insisted on accompanying Carter to the infirmary, despite the humans' protest. Now, as the faint hum of the medical equipment filled the silence, Jektal found himself replaying the events of the exercise over and over in his mind. "You could have been killed," he said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was quiet, his tone heavy with something Carter couldn't quite place. Guilt, perhaps, or admiration. "You didn't have to push yourself so far." Carter glanced at him, his expression unreadable. I did what needed to be done. We all made it out, didn't we? Jektal's mandibles clicked softly, a nervous tick that betrayed his frustration. You were bleeding out, limping into a swarm of drones with no guarantee you'd even reach the beacon. No one would have blamed you if you'd fallen back. Xiron was ready to call it your inevitable failure. His antennae twitched, but you didn't. Why? Carter leaned back slightly, the corners of his mouth quirking into a faint, tired smile. Because giving up wasn't an option. Not for me, and not for any of you. Look, I get it. Humans don't have claws, or exoskeletons, or regenerative powers. We're fragile. I've heard it a million times. But we're more than just our biology. His eyes locked on Jektal's. What keeps us going, what makes us survive, is up here. He tapped a finger to his temple. And in here, he placed his hand over his chest. The words lingered in the air, filling the room with a gravity Jektal hadn't anticipated. He stared at Carter, searching for any sign of arrogance or pretense. Instead, all he saw was sincerity, a raw, unshakable conviction that made him question everything he thought he knew about humans. I've seen species crumble under pressure, Jektal said after a moment. Even the strongest among us have limits. What happens when yours are reached? Carter's smile faded, replaced by something harder, more resolute. Then we break. But we do it fighting. Before Jektal could respond, the infirmary door slid open with a soft hiss. Xiron entered, his crystalline form glinting under the fluorescent lights. His gaze flicked between Carter and Jektal, his usual smugness replaced by an expression that bordered on grudging respect. You've been summoned, Xiron said, addressing Carter. The Command Council wants a debrief. They're curious how a fragile human managed to lead an elite training team to victory. Carter smirked faintly, rising from the cot despite the protest of his injured leg. Let's not keep them waiting. Jektal followed as they made their way through the Academy's labyrinthine corridors. The halls buzzed with activity, other cadets and officers pausing to whisper as Carter passed. News of the training exercise had spread quickly, and the human's performance had become the talk of the Academy. For the first time, Jektal noticed the subtle shifts in the way others looked at Carter. Less derision, more curiosity. The Command Council's chamber was a stark, circular room dominated by a central table that glowed with holographic displays. High-ranking officers from various species sat around it, their expressions ranging from neutral to mildly impressed. At the head of the table was Admiral Thalric, a towering, broad-shouldered Carithian whose scaled skin shimmered with authority. Lieutenant Carter, Thalric rumbled, his deep voice reverberating through the chamber. Your team's performance during the exercise was unexpected. Carter stepped forward, his posture straight despite the limp in his gait. Thank you, sir. The Admiral's piercing gaze swept over him, lingering on the faint bloodstains that marred his uniform. Reports indicate that you sustained significant injuries during the mission, and yet you not only continued to lead but completed the objective personally. Explain? Carter took a breath, his voice steady. The team needed someone to act, sir. The drones were targeting the strongest among us, as expected, and I was the least likely to draw their full attention at first. It was a calculated risk, and one I was willing to take. Willing to take? One of the council members, a sleek, amphibious Reclin, leaned forward with a frown. Your actions could have resulted in your death. Was that truly calculated or merely reckless? Carter met the Reclin's gaze unflinchingly. Humans don't survive by avoiding risk, ma'am. We survive by embracing it, by pushing past what seems impossible and finding a way forward. I didn't act alone. The team worked together. But someone had to lead the charge, and in that moment, it was me. The room fell silent as the council absorbed his words. Finally, Thalric spoke again, his tone thoughtful. Your actions defy expectation, Lieutenant. Many here doubted humanity's place in this academy. Your performance today suggests otherwise. Thank you, sir, Carter replied, his voice tinged with humility. As the debrief concluded and the council dismissed him, Carter turned to leave, Jektal and Xiron trailing behind. Once they were out of earshot, Xiron broke the silence. I still don't understand it, the crystalline alien said, his voice tinged with reluctant curiosity. You put yourself in harm's way for the sake of others. Why? Carter paused, glancing over his shoulder. His gaze was steady, unwavering. Because that's what it means to be human. We don't just survive for ourselves. We survive for each other. The words struck a chord in Jektal, resonating deeply. As they continued down the corridor, he found himself looking at Carter not as a curiosity or an enigma, but as something far more profound. The human wasn't just strong in ways they didn't understand. He was something they could aspire to. And in that moment, Jektal realized that everything he had thought about humans was wrong. They weren't fragile. They weren't weak. They were the embodiment of resilience, of determination, of an unyielding spirit that refused to be broken. For the first time, Jektal understood why the Galactic Union had accepted them. Humans weren't just survivors, they were fighters, and that made them unstoppable. The victory celebrations were subdued. The simulation had been a grueling test, pushing every team to their limits. In the vast hall where cadets gathered for the final debrief, whispers filled the air. Some spoke of their triumphs, others of narrow escapes. But most eyes turned toward Carter's team, the unlikely group that had defied expectations and accomplished the near impossible. Carter sat on the edge of a bench, his shoulder hastily bandaged, his leg propped up awkwardly. Exhaustion etched deep lines into his face, but his eyes remained sharp, scanning the room. Around him, his team stood in quiet solidarity, Zyron's crystalline surface faintly glowing, Jektal's antennae twitching as he observed their surroundings, Kale and Drix whispering softly to one another in their native tongues. Admiral Thalric entered the hall, his imposing presence immediately silencing the crowd. His piercing gaze swept over the assembled cadets before settling on Carter's team. He approached with measured steps, his scaled visage unreadable. "Cadets," Thalric began, his deep voice reverberating through the hall, "you have been tested under conditions that would break the strongest of warriors. Many of you performed admirably. Few of you excelled. And fewer still," he paused, his gaze locking onto Carter, "demonstrated the qualities we value most in the Galactic Alliance. Resilience, adaptability, and unity." The room was deathly silent as Thalric gestured toward Carter. "Step forward, Lieutenant." Carter pushed himself to his feet, gritting his teeth against the pain. He limped toward the Admiral, his movements deliberate. The hall seemed to shrink around him, every eye fixed on his battered form. For a moment, he felt the weight of their judgment, the doubts, the skepticism that had followed him since the beginning. "You led your team through insurmountable odds," Thalric continued, his voice softer now, but no less commanding. "You achieved victory not through brute strength or technological superiority, but through strategy, courage, and an unyielding spirit. Tell me, Lieutenant, what drives a human to fight so fiercely, even when the odds are against them?" Carter met the Admiral's gaze, his voice steady despite his fatigue. "Because giving up isn't an option, sir. When everything's on the line, when failure means letting down the people who rely on you, you find a way, no matter the cost." Thalric studied him for a long moment before nodding. "A sentiment that will serve you well in the battles to come." He turned to address the rest of the cadets. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. Strength alone does not win wars. It is the spirit, the will to endure, that turns the tide. Remember this." As the Admiral departed, murmurs broke out across the hall. Carter returned to his team, their expressions a mix of pride and relief. Jektal clapped him on the shoulder, careful to avoid his injuries. "Not bad for a so-called fragile species." Zyron chuckled, the sound like the chime of glass. "You're starting to grow on me, human. Don't let it go to your head." Carter managed a weak grin. "I'll try to keep that in check." The days that followed were a whirlwind. Carter's injuries were treated in the Academy's med bay, where he spent long hours recovering. News of his team's success spread quickly, sparking debates among cadets and instructors alike. Some viewed it as proof of humanity's potential, while others dismissed it as a fluke, a lucky break in an otherwise grueling trial. But for Carter, the mission had been more than a test of skill. It was a revelation. The bond he had forged with his team, being so different from himself, was unlike anything he had experienced before. They had trusted him, relied on him, and in doing so, they had achieved something extraordinary. The final ceremony arrived sooner than expected. The Academy's grand amphitheater was filled with cadets, instructors, and dignitaries from across the galaxy. The air was charged with anticipation as Admiral Thalric took the stage, flanked by a council of high-ranking officials. Today, we honor those who have completed their training and proven themselves worthy of serving the Galactic Alliance, Thalric announced. Each of you represents the best your species has to offer. But among you, there are those who have gone above and beyond, demonstrating qualities that embody the very essence of unity. He gestured for Carter's team to join him on the stage. The room erupted into applause as they stepped forward, their heads held high. Carter limped slightly, but his movements were steadier now, his resolve unshaken. Thalric continued, his voice carrying over the crowd. Let this team serve as a symbol of what we can achieve when we set aside our differences and work together. Their success is not just their own. It is a testament to the strength of the Alliance. Medals were presented one by one. As the cool medal rested against his chest, Carter felt a surge of pride, not for himself, but for what they had accomplished as a team. The applause thundered around them, but his thoughts were elsewhere, on the challenges that lay ahead. Later that evening, as the celebrations died down, Carter found himself alone on one of the Academy's observation decks. The stars stretched out before him, endless and unchanging. Footsteps approached, and he turned to see Jektal, Zyron, Kale, and Drix standing behind him. "You're not the only one who enjoys the view, you know," Jektal said, leaning against the railing. His antennae twitched as he looked out at the stars. Carter smiled faintly. "I was just thinking about what comes next." Zyron tilted his head, his crystalline features catching the starlight. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. That's how we do things now, isn't it?" Kale buzzed in agreement, his wings fluttering softly. "No more doubts, no more second-guessing. You've proven yourself, human, and so have we." Drix nodded, his deep voice resonating. "The galaxy is vast, filled with challenges we can't begin to imagine. But if we can survive that simulation, we can survive anything." Carter looked at them, his heart swelling with gratitude. "We didn't just survive. We thrived, and I couldn't have done it without you." As they stood together, gazing out at the infinite expanse of stars, Carter felt a renewed sense of purpose. The galaxy was waiting, filled with dangers and opportunities alike. But for the first time, he felt ready to face whatever came next, not as an individual but as part of a team. The moment was quiet, but it carried the weight of everything they had been through. And as the stars continued their silent dance, Carter knew one thing for certain. Humanity wasn't fragile. It was resilient, determined, and capable of far more than anyone had ever imagined. And together, with allies by his side, there was nothing they couldn't accomplish.